In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war.
In the 41st millennium, there is only war. But war follows patterns, strategies refined over 10,000 years, Xenos threats cataloged and countered, heretical incursions predicted and purged. The Imperium of Man had faced every conceivable horror. Demons that fed on fear, alien swarms that devoured worlds, ancient machines that harvested souls. They had survived it all through faith, fanaticism, and the sheer bloody-minded refusal to surrender. Yet no strategist, no prognosticator, no astropath gazing into the warp's turbulent depths had foreseen what emerged at the edge of the segmentum obscurus on that day. Something that followed no pattern the Imperium understood. Something that didn't hunger for souls or glory or conquest. Something that wanted only one thing: perfection. And it would assimilate everything in its path, and it kind to achieve it. The Borg cube tore through reality like a blade through parchment. It didn't emerge from the warp, that roiling dimension of psychic madness and demonic horror, but from somewhere else. A transwarp conduit, already failing from catastrophic damage, had punched through the fabric of one universe and into another. The cube tumbled out of the spatial tear, its hull scarred by energies that should not exist. Green illumination flickering across its surface like a dying star. 3 kilometers on each side, a geometric impossibility of right angles and industrial efficiency. It drifted into real space, trailing debris and severed conduits. On the bridge of the Righteous Fury, an Imperial Navy battlecruiser patrolling the Viridian Belt. Commodore Hastus Vrain watched the auger displays with growing dread. The sensors screamed warnings in a dozen different languages. High Gothic, Binary Kent, Ancient Terra dialects, all trying to categorize what had appeared. The ship's cogitator banks overheated, attempting to process the anomaly. Tech priests rushed between stations, murmuring prayers to the machine god as incense smoke filled the command deck. Commodore, his master of augurs reported, voice tight with barely controlled panic. The object registers no warp signature, no plasma drives, no Geller field. It's just there, as if the void itself birthed it. Vrain studied the hololithic display. The cube rotated slowly, almost contemplatively, as if examining its new surroundings. Lights pulsed across its surface in patterns that hurt to look at. Too regular, too precise. No Imperial vessel, no Xenos craft he'd encountered in 40 years of service moved like that. It was wrong in a way that bypassed reason and struck directly at some primal instinct. "Life signs?" he demanded. The augur officer's face went pale. "Thousands, sir. Tens of thousands. But they're synchronized, moving in perfect unison. It's as if..." He paused, consulting his instruments again. "As if they're all one organism." Tyranids. The word flashed through Vrain's mind. But Tyranid bioships didn't look like this. They were organic, grotesque, recognizably alive. This thing was geometric precision made manifest. Cold, industrial, soulless. "Sound general quarters," Vrain ordered. "Charge Lance batteries, prepare boarding torpedoes. If this is some new Xenos abomination, we'll introduce it to the Emperor's justice before it threatens the Imperium." The Righteous Fury surged forward, her sister ships Indomitable and Hammer of Wrath forming a classic envelopment pattern. Lance batteries powered up with the characteristic whine of massive energy capacitors reaching critical charge. Void shields shimmered into existence around each vessel. This was familiar. This was war as the Imperium understood it. Inside the damaged Borg cube, trillions of minds thought as one. The collective assessed its situation with cold efficiency. Transwarp conduit, catastrophically failed. Current location, unknown. Damage assessment, 31% of drones offline, regeneration systems operating at 67% capacity, shield matrix compromised. 3 vessels approaching, primitive fusion-based propulsion, energy weapons charging. The collective's response was instantaneous and unanimous. Adapt, assimilate, achieve perfection. We are the Borg. The cube transmitted on all frequencies, in every language it had ever assimilated. The message reached the righteous fury as a cacophony of voices speaking in perfect unison. Human, alien, synthetic, organic, all blended into one harmonious whole. Lower your shields and surrender your ships. We will add your biological and technological distinctiveness to our own. Your culture will adapt to service us. Resistance is futile. Commodore Vrain listened to the transmission with mounting horror. The voice wasn't threatening. It wasn't mocking. It was simply stating fact, as if his death and assimilation were already accomplished, merely awaiting execution. "Fire everything," he whispered. The lance batteries spoke. 3 beams of coherent energy, each capable of vaporizing a hab block, lanced across the void and struck the Borg cube. For a moment, the ancient technology of the Imperium met something it had never encountered. The cube's shields flared, absorbed the impact, and then learned. The second volley struck shielding that had already begun adapting, dispersing energy that should have carved through hull plating like tissue. "Impossibility," breathed the Master of Augurs. "It's adapting. The machine god preserve us. It's adapting." The Borg cube rotated with terrifying deliberation. A section of its hull reconfigured itself, mechanical components sliding into new patterns with insectile precision. Energy gathered at dozens of points across its surface. Then it returned fire. Cutting beams, emerald lances of pure force, sliced through the void. They struck the hammer of wrath amidships, bypassing void shields as if they didn't exist, carving through adamantium plating with surgical precision. Atmosphere vented in frozen clouds. Bodies tumbled into space, flash frozen before they could scream. The ship broke apart, her plasma reactors detonating in a miniature sun that briefly illuminated the darkness. 3,000 souls, extinguished in seconds. "Evasive maneuvers," Vrain roared. "All power to forward shields, prepare boarding." A tractor beam seized the righteous fury, green energy wrapping around the battlecruiser like the fingers of an ancient god. The ship's engines screamed, but they might as well have been pushing against a planet. The Borg cube reeled them in with inexorable patience. In the launch bays, Space Marines of the Storm Wardens chapter locked their helms into place. Brother Sergeant Malthius checked his bolter's ammunition feed one final time. Around him, his brothers prepared for boarding action with the grim efficiency of warriors who had fought for 2 centuries. They were the Emperor's finest, genetically enhanced super soldiers who knew no fear. "Brothers," Malthius voxed across the squad channel. "Whatever Xenos abomination awaits us, remember, we are the storm. We are the Emperor's wrath, and we do not fail." "For the Emperor," came the unified response. The boarding torpedoes launched, their ancient warheads punching through the Borg cube's outer hull with brutal efficiency. Assault ramps slammed down, and the Storm Wardens charged into the alien vessel, bolters roaring. What they found within would haunt the Imperium's nightmares for years to come. If any of them survived to tell the tale, the interior of the Borg cube was a cathedral of cold efficiency. No Gothic arches, no purity seals, no incense-burning braziers, just endless corridors of dark metal punctuated by pulsing green light. The Storm Wardens advanced in combat formation, their enhanced senses cataloging every detail. The air tasted sterile, recycled 1,000 times. The temperature was precisely maintained at what Imperial records would call optimal human function. Not comfortable, merely efficient. Conduits ran along every surface like mechanical veins, humming with power that made their armor's sensor arrays spike with warning runes. Brother Sergeant Malthius raised his fist, halting the squad. Ahead, shadows moved with unnatural synchronization. Then the Borg drones stepped into view. They had been human once, or Xenos, or something else entirely. Now they were unified in grotesque perfection, flesh merged with machinery in ways that made even the Adeptus Mechanicus's augmentations look primitive. Their skin was pale, bloodless, interrupted by black metallic implants that covered faces and limbs. One eye on each drone had been replaced with a crimson optical sensor that tracked the Space Marines with dispassionate interest. They moved in lockstep, dozens of them, as if rehearsed. Xenos abominations. Malthius growled into the Vox. The Emperor's mercy is death. Purge them. Bolters roared. Mass reactive rounds, each one a miniature rocket designed to penetrate armor before exploding, hammered into the advancing drones. Bodies jerked and fell. Limbs were blown apart. For a moment, it seemed almost disappointingly easy. Then the drones behind the fallen stepped over their destroyed kin without pause, and the ones hit by bolter rounds began to regenerate. Malthius watched in horrified fascination as nanoprobes, microscopic machines visible only as a faint shimmer, swarmed over damaged tissue. Wounds sealed, shattered cybernetics rebuilt themselves. A drone with half its torso blown away continued walking forward while its internal systems knitted back together. Green energy pulsing through the reconstruction process. "Emperor, preserve us," breathed Brother Caltus. "They heal faster than tyrannid organisms." The drones raised their arms. Tubules, thin mechanical appendages tipped with injection mechanisms, emerged from their wrists. The Storm Wardens had faced every horror the galaxy could produce. They had fought in the eye of terror itself, walked through demonic incursions that would shatter mortal minds. But something about these creatures, the absolute absence of hatred, of hunger, of any emotion whatsoever, struck deeper than fear. "Adapt defensive pattern, Crucible," Malthius ordered. The Storm Wardens formed a tight circle, overlapping fields of fire. Bolters switched to full automatic. The corridor became a storm of explosive ammunition, each round finding its mark with transhuman precision. The first wave of drones fell. The second wave adapted. Malthius saw it happen in real time. The drone's personal shielding, previously non-existent, shimmered into place. Bolter rounds detonated against invisible barriers inches from their targets. The Borg didn't retreat, didn't take cover. They simply incorporated the new data and continued their advance with mechanical inevitability. "Switch to plasma," Malthius commanded, drawing his own pistol. Superheated gas capable of melting through tank armor lanced through the corridor. 3 drones vaporized instantly. The others faltered for exactly 2.3 seconds while the collective analyzed the new threat. Then their shielding modulated again, dispersing thermal energy that should have reduced them to atomic vapor. Brother Caltus was the first to fall. A drone moved with inhuman speed, its assimilation tubules punching through the seals in his armor's neck joint, the only vulnerable spot in Mark 7 plate. Nanoprobes flooded into his bloodstream. Caltus screamed, a sound that no space marine should be capable of making. His enhanced physiology fought the invasion with desperate ferocity. 3 hearts pumped furiously, trying to flush out the contamination. His catalepsy and node attempted emergency shutdown. His omophagia secreted defensive enzymes. It wasn't enough. Malthaeus watched his brother's screams cut off with terrifying abruptness. Caltus stood, turned, and looked at his former brothers with one human eye and one Borg optical implant. When he spoke, his voice had become part of the harmonious collective chorus. We are the Borg. You will be assimilated. Resistance is futile. Then Caltus, or what had been Caltus, charged his former squad with bolter raised. The Storm Wardens hesitated for a fraction of a second. That was all the Borg needed. More drones poured from side corridors that hadn't been there moments before. The cube was reconfiguring itself around them, turning the environment into a tactical advantage. Assimilation tubules struck with Viper precision. Brother Demetrin fell, then Brother Cross, then Brother Salvius. Each one rose seconds later, their genetic enhancements and centuries of combat experience added to the collective's growing understanding of this new universe. Malthaeus fired his plasma pistol point blank into Caltus's face. The shot vaporized the drone's head completely. He felt nothing, no grief, no rage, only cold tactical assessment. The body fell, but Malthaeus knew the collective had already absorbed everything Caltus had been. "Fall back," he ordered the 5 remaining Storm Wardens. "Fighting retreat to the torpedoes." They ran through corridors that shifted and changed, the cube's internal structure adapting to herd them like prey. Behind them, assimilated Storm Wardens pursued with perfect coordination, using tactics the collective had extracted from their minds. The hunters had become the hunted. Malthaeus's armor systems showed critical damage warnings. A cutting beam had scored his pauldron, leaving a melted scar through the Storm Warden's heraldry. His bolt pistol was down to 3 rounds. They reached the boarding torpedo to find drones already swarming over it, their assimilation tubules buried in the ancient machinery, learning its secrets. "Detonate charges," Malthaeus commanded. "We don't leave technology for the enemy." Brother Hellas triggered his armor's self-destruct sequence and charged the drones. The explosion was tactical nuclear in yield, designed to prevent a fallen Space Marine's gene seed from being recovered by enemies. It vaporized everything within a 20-meter radius: drones, torpedo, and Hellas himself. The collective registered the loss of 17 drones and filed away the data. Subject species possesses fanatical dedication. Will sacrifice individual units to prevent technological acquisition. Adaptation. Increase assimilation speed. Prioritize capture of self-destruct mechanisms. Malthaeus and his 3 remaining brothers fought their way to a hull breach. Not their entry point, but a new wound the cube had suffered during its catastrophic arrival. They leaped into the void, activating emergence maglocks to pull themselves along the cube's exterior toward the righteous fury, still held in the tractor beam's grip. Behind them, through the breach, Malthaeus saw drones already sealing the wound with mechanical efficiency. And among them, 7 figures in Storm Warden's armor worked in perfect synchronization with their captors. The Vox crackled. Commodore Vrain's voice carried barely controlled panic. "All ships, this is Righteous Fury actual. Emergency distress, Omicron-level threat. Unknown Xenos vessel has..." Static. Screams. The sound of metal tearing. Assimilating the crew. They're in the walls, in the systems. The ship itself is being consumed. I'm initiating scuttle protocols. If anyone receives this, warn the Imperium. This enemy adapts. It learns. The transmission cut off. Malthaeus pulled himself along the Borg cube's hull, his armor's external sensors tracking the righteous fury. The battlecruiser's lights flickered and died, section by section, like a living thing suffering systematic organ failure. Through viewports, he glimpsed green light spreading like infection through the corridors. The ship wasn't being destroyed, it was being converted. The Indomitable broke formation, her captain finally recognizing the threat's true nature. She fired every weapon simultaneously, lances, macro cannons, torpedo spreads, in a desperate bombardment. The Borg Cube's shields absorbed the onslaught, flickering but holding. The Collective had analyzed Imperial weapons technology from the destroyed Hammer of Wrath and adapted accordingly. Then the cube released the Righteous Fury. The battlecruiser, now silent and dark except for pulsing green illumination within, oriented toward the fleeing Indomitable. Its lance batteries fired, but the beams were wrong. They carried that same emerald taint, that same geometric precision. The shots bypassed void shields with contemptuous ease and carved through the Indomitable's engines. Dead in space, the Imperial vessel could only watch as boarding craft, geometric shapes that seemed to fold space around themselves, launched from both the cube and the corrupted Righteous Fury. Malthius and his brothers reached an emergency escape pod still attached to the Righteous Fury's hull. They crammed inside, designed for 6 normal humans, but barely accommodating 4 space marines in full armor. As the pod's ancient rockets fired, carrying them away from the nightmare, Malthius activated his armor's long-range Vox. This is Brother Sergeant Malthius, Storm Warden's 4th Company, to any Imperial forces. Emergency astropathic relay required. Unknown Xenos threat, classification unknown. They assimilate biological and technological matter. They adapt to weapons in real time. They turn our own people against us. He paused, watching through the pod's viewport as the Indomitable went dark, section by section. The Emperor protects, but I fear this enemy may be beyond our understanding. The pod systems engaged emergency warp translation, a desperate, dangerous jump without proper navigators. As they tumbled into the Imperium, Malthius caught one final glimpse of the Borg Cube. It hung in space like a mechanical god, already beginning repairs, already growing. Around it, 3 Imperial vessels, 1 destroyed, 2 assimilated, represented not defeat, but resources. And deep within the cube, the Collective processed its first encounters with this new universe. The data was fascinating, contradictory. Impossible by the laws of physics as the Borg understood them. These humans possessed genetic enhancements that violated biological principles. Their weapons were inscribed with prayers, as if faith itself provided function. Their ships contained something called machine spirits, that the Collective sensors detected as actual, measurable phenomena. Most disturbing, several assimilated subjects possessed something the Collective had no framework to understand. The Imperial crew called them souls, and those souls, upon assimilation, attracted attention from somewhere else, somewhere that existed outside normal space-time, the warp. 4 assimilated drones had become corrupted by something that entered through their souls. Demonic entities that twisted Borg implants into blasphemous shapes. The Collective had been forced to sever them from the hive mind and eject them into space. The loss was acceptable. The implication was not. This universe operated on principles that included the impossible. Faith as measurable force, souls as vulnerable attack vector, reality itself subject to emotional manipulation. The Borg Collective reached a unanimous conclusion. Adaptation required. New data must be acquired. Perfection demands understanding of all systems, even those that defy logic. 3 Imperial ships had provided sufficient biological and technological distinctiveness for initial analysis. The Collective now understood Imperial Gothic, could replicate Imperial technology, and possessed comprehensive tactical data from assimilated Space Marine combat experience. It was a beginning. But the Borg required more. Always more. The Cube's systems began manufacturing new drones from assimilated matter. Nanoprobes replicated exponentially, preparing for wider dispersal. The damage from the transwarp incident dropped from 31% to 22% as regeneration systems worked with tireless efficiency. And across 3 nearby systems, colonies the Righteous Fury's astrogation data had revealed, the Borg prepared to spread. Resistance, as always, was futile. The escape pod translated back into real space 3 days later, vomiting the Storm Wardens into the outskirts of the Viridian system. Brother Sergeant Maltheus watched his squad's vital signs with growing concern. Brother Thanios had entered Susan membrane, the Space Marine emergency coma, after his armor's life support failed during the warp jump. Brother Krast bore a festering wound, where assimilation tubules had penetrated his armor but failed to breach his skin. His Laraman cells had sealed the injury, but the nanoprobes were still present, dormant but detectable by his armor's bioscanner. Brother Sergeant, voxed Brother Dominic, the squad's sole surviving veteran. We need to reach an Imperial facility immediately. Krast's contamination could spread. Maltheus knew the protocol. Any Marine exposed to Xenos corruption should be terminated immediately, his gene seed extracted and purified. But Krast was still fighting, still loyal. The nanoprobes hadn't activated. Whatever the Borg were, they operated on principles that didn't include latent infection. They assimilated immediately, or not at all. Viridian Thur has an administratum way station, Maltheus said, consulting the pod's corrupted navigational data. We make for there, report to authorities, request astropathic relay to chapter command. The Imperium needs to know what's coming. What Maltheus didn't know was that the Imperium was already learning. 7 hours before the Storm Warden's pod emerged from the warp, the Borg Cube arrived at Viridian 7th, a mining colony of 40,000 souls extracting promethium from subterranean reservoirs. The colony had minimal defenses, a single orbital station, 3 system patrol ships, and a PDF garrison armed with laser guns and faith in the Emperor. The Borg didn't announce themselves. They didn't demand surrender. They simply acted. Assimilation beams lanced down from orbit, emerald pillars of light that carved through the colony's void shields as if they were fog. The beams didn't destroy. They converted. Where they touched, matter reorganized at the molecular level. Rockcrete transformed into Borg infrastructure. Hab blocks became assimilation chambers. The refinery's massive promethium tanks were repurposed into power generation nodes. And the people, 40,000 Imperial citizens who had never known anything but loyalty to the Emperor, were harvested like crops. Governor Helion Vask watched from his command bunker as the pillars of light descended. He'd served the Imperium for 60 years, survived 3 Xenos incursions and 2 heretical uprisings. He knew his duty. Signal the astropaths, he ordered, voice steady despite the trembling in his hands. Emergency transmission, segmentum command, unknown Xenos force, classification. He paused, watching through picked feeds as his people walked calmly toward the light, drawn by something his sensors couldn't detect. Classification. Extinction level threat. Immediate military response required. May the Emperor. The bunker's walls began to change. Metal surfaces rippled like water, reforming into geometric patterns. Green light seeped through seals that should have been impermeable. Vask drew his last pistol, pointed it at the door. It didn't matter. The Borg assimilated the bunker's very structure, circumventing defenses by making them irrelevant. Drones emerged from walls that had been solid moments before. Vask fired until his power pack depleted. The drone's personal shields absorbed every shot, the Collective having long since adapted to directed energy weapons. Assimilation tubules found his neck. The last thing Governor Helion Vask felt as an individual was the cold invasion of nanoprobes entering his bloodstream. Then his consciousness, his memories, his experiences, his 60 years of Imperial service, was absorbed into something vast. He saw through 10,000 eyes simultaneously, felt the Collective's thoughts flowing through him like an ocean current, understood with perfect clarity that everything he had believed was inferior to what he had become. When the drone that had been Vask turned to assimilate the astropaths who'd huddled in the corner, praying for the Emperor's protection, it felt nothing. Not pleasure, not remorse. Only the satisfaction of adding new distinctiveness to the Collective. The astropaths' deaths were more complicated. Their souls, bound to the Emperor through years of sanctioning and psychic conditioning, resisted assimilation in ways purely physical beings could not. As nanoprobes invaded their nervous systems, their psychic screams tore through the warp itself. Distress calls that reached across light years in an instant. On Viridian the 30, astropath sentinel Mordian jolted awake in her sanctum, blood streaming from her nose. The psychic scream was unlike anything in her catalog. Not the hungry song of tyrannids, not the mocking laughter of demons, not the cold void thought of necrons. This was silence, a silence that devoured sound, that consumed thought itself, that replaced individuality with harmonious unity. She reached for the astropathic relay with trembling hands and began sending warnings across the sector. Her message was fragmented, barely coherent. The psychic trauma of witnessing 7 astropaths' assimilation had damaged her mind irreparably. But its core was clear. Something new. Something that ends souls. Something that makes us one. Within 12 hours, the warning reached Inquisitor Covenant of the Ordo Xenos. Covenant stood in her flagship's sanctum, studying the fragmented reports with cold fury. She was a woman who had served the Emperor's Inquisition for 90 years, her body sustained by Juvenat treatments and augmetic enhancements. She'd authorized the extermination of 3 billion heretics, personally executed a corrupted cardinal, and once stared down a lictor in single combat. Nothing in this galaxy frightened her. These reports frightened her. "Summarize," she commanded her savant servitor, a lobotomized scholar whose brain had been repurposed for pure data analysis. 3 Imperial Navy vessels, destroyed or compromised. Viridian 7 colony, communication lost, last transmission indicates Xenos assimilation event. Storm Warden survivors report enemy adapts to weapons in real time, converts victims into drone soldiers, operates with hive mind coordination. Astropathic testimony suggests psychic resistance, but ultimate failure. The servitor's monotone never wavered. Threat assessment, Omega level. Recommended response, exterminatus of affected systems. Immediate Astartes deployment, sector-wide quarantine. Covenant's augmetic eye, a gift from the Adeptus Mechanicus, zoomed in on the tactical display. 3 systems showing communication blackouts. Refugee vessels fleeing into neighboring sectors. And at the center, a single geometric anomaly that her sensors could barely categorize. "No," she said quietly. "Exterminatus wastes resources we need to understand. This enemy learns from us. We must learn from it first." She turned to her command staff. "Signal the absolute conviction, the pious fury, and the God Emperor's wrath. Full battle group deployment to Viridian System. Authorization Vermilion. This is now an inquisitorial investigation with lethal force authorized. Her chief armsman, a grizzled veteran with half his face replaced by bionics, cleared his throat. Ma'am, with respect, the reports indicate this enemy converts our people, our ships, our technology. Every engagement provides it more resources. Precisely. Covenant's smile was sharp. Which is why we're bringing something it hasn't encountered yet. She activated a private Vox channel. Sergeant Kolvar, prepare your squad. You're about to earn your chapter's reputation. Elsewhere in the ship, 10 figures stood in a chamber kept at precisely 3 degrees above freezing. They wore no colors, bore no heraldry, displayed no chapter markings. They were the Death Watch, space marines drawn from various chapters and bonded in service to the Ordo Xeno. They were specialists in Xenos extermination, each one a veteran of horrors most Imperial citizens couldn't imagine. Sergeant Kolvar, formerly of the Exorcists chapter, listened to the Inquisitors' briefing with professional detachment. He'd fought Genestealers in Space Hulk depths, purged Orc infestations from Shrine worlds, battled Eldar Corsairs in the Webway itself. This new threat, adaptive, assimilating, coldly logical, presented unique challenges. Brothers, he voxed to his squad, we face an enemy that learns. Therefore, we must teach it only lessons that serve the Emperor. Every weapon we fire, every tactic we employ, becomes knowledge they can use against us. We must be unpredictable, brutal, and we must leave no survivors to carry our methods back to their collective. The Death Watch veterans locked their helms in place. Each carried specialized ammunition, venomous rounds, psych-out grenades, dragonfire shells designed to penetrate even the toughest armor. Each had fought for decades on the Imperium's bleeding edge. They boarded their Corvus Blackstar gunship in silence, knowing that this deployment might be their last. The ship launched, carrying them toward the Viridian System and the geometric nightmare waiting there. Meanwhile, aboard the Borg Cube, the Collective was experiencing something unprecedented. Confusion. The assimilation of Viridian 7 had provided vast quantities of data. The Collective now understood Imperial Gothic in 47 dialects, could replicate laser guns and basic vehicles, possessed detailed maps of 17 Imperial systems. But the more it learned about this universe, the less sense it made. Analysis of assimilated astropaths revealed biological structures, pineal glands, neural pathways, genetic markers that shouldn't produce the effects reported. Yet these individuals had demonstrably transmitted information across light years instantaneously by accessing something called the warp. Sensors detected this warp as a parallel dimension of pure energy, chaotic and unpredictable, fundamentally incompatible with ordered space-time. Worse, 37% of assimilated humans possessed this soul phenomenon, and souls attracted attention from warp entities. The Collective had been forced to purge 1,247 drones after demonic corruption spread through their neural links like a virus. The corruption didn't follow logical progression. It jumped between drones based on proximity to those with strong souls, spreading through the hive mind itself. The Borg Collective reached a concerning conclusion. This universe contains variables that cannot be controlled through adaptation alone. New strategies required. A minority subroutine suggested withdrawal, return to known space, classification of this dimension as hostile and inefficient for assimilation. The suggestion was analyzed for 0.003 seconds and rejected. The Borg did not retreat. The Borg adapted, always, New protocols were implemented. Drones with sole presence would be isolated in separate sub-collectives with limited hive mind connection. Assimilation of psychers would be attempted under controlled conditions to weaponize warp access. Captured Imperial technology would be replicated and improved, replacing inferior Starfleet-era systems damaged in transwarp incident. Expansion would continue to 3 additional systems before Imperial response could organize. The Borg Cube. Its hull now showing visible repairs and modifications, sections replaced with assimilated Imperial armor plating, giving it a grotesque hybrid appearance. Turned toward Viridian Vive, the agricultural world's 8 million citizens would provide sufficient biological matter for the next phase of expansion. High above the planet, defense monitors detected the approaching threat. Sirens wailed across cities and farmlands. PDF forces mobilized with desperate haste. Priests led prayers in every hab and hamlet, their voices rising in benediction to the Emperor. And the Borg descended, implacable as entropy, bringing their gospel of enforced perfection to a world that worshipped imperfect faith. Resistance they transmitted on all frequencies was futile. But in the darkness between stars, Inquisitor Covenant's battle group translated into real space, weapons hot and fury cold. The Imperium was learning too, and it was about to teach the Borg a lesson about the dangers of underestimating humanity's capacity for fanatical violence. The absolute conviction emerged from the warp like an avenging angel, her void shields flaring as real space reasserted itself around 15,000 tons of consecrated adamantium and righteous fury. Behind her, 3 more inquisitorial vessels formed a battle line that spoke of grim purpose. Inquisitor Covenant stood on the command bridge, her augmetic eye processing tactical data faster than any human mind could follow. The Borg Cube hung in high orbit over Viridian V, already surrounded by a constellation of smaller craft. Converted Imperial vessels, their hulls now bearing that distinctive geometric corruption. From the planet's surface, emerald beams lanced upward, connecting the cube to newly constructed structures that sprawled across what had been farmland. The assimilation had been underway for 7 hours. 8 million souls, Covenant whispered. How many remain? Her savant servitor's response was immediate and merciless. Estimated survivor population, 2.3 million. Rate of assimilation, 470,000 per hour. Projected total conversion, 11 hours, 16 minutes. Covenant's jaw tightened. She'd authorized exterminatus before. Watched worlds burn from orbit, their populations sacrificed to prevent greater contamination. It never became easier. But this was different. Exterminatus would only delay this enemy. The cube would survive, adapt, move on. She needed to understand it, wound it, learn its weaknesses. Deploy the Death Watch, she commanded. Target coordinates, primary assimilation complex, northern continent. Rules of engagement, capture Xenos technology intact if possible, but prioritize intelligence gathering. I want to know how they think. And the cube itself? Her master of ordnance asked, fingers hovering over firing solutions that would unleash the fury of 3 Nova cannons. Not yet. Covenant studied the tactical display, her mind racing through probabilities. It adapted to Imperial Navy weapons in minutes. We fire now, we teach it how to counter our best armaments. We need to make it extend itself, divide its attention. Then we strike. In the Absolute Conviction's launch bay, Sergeant Kolvar and his Death Watch squad boarded their Corvus Blackstar. The gunship was a marvel of Death Watch engineering. Silent, fast, equipped with systems designed for surgical strikes against the Imperium's most dangerous foes. As they secured themselves in the crash harnesses, Kolvar reviewed the mission parameters one final time. Our target is their central processing facility. He voxed to his squad. Intelligence suggests this enemy operates through distributed consciousness, a hive mind. We find where they coordinate this assimilation, we plant vortex charges, and we extract before the whole complex gets pulled into the warp. Brother Artemius, a Dark Angel veteran, checked his plasma incinerator. And if we encounter converted Imperial forces? We purge them, Kolvar replied without hesitation. They are lost. We grant them the Emperor's mercy and ensure they reveal no further tactical intelligence to the enemy. The Corvus Black Star launched, its engines burning cold and silent as it descended through Viridian V's atmosphere. Below them, the planet's surface had become a nightmare of transformation. Farms had been dissolved and rebuilt as geometric structures that hurt to look at, angles that seemed wrong, surfaces that reflected light in impossible ways. Rivers of molten metal flowed between structures, carrying raw materials to central processing nodes. And everywhere, drones worked with tireless precision. The gunship's auspex detected thousands of life signs, all moving in perfect synchronization. Former farmers, PDF troopers, administratum clerks, all converted into components of a vast machine organism. Children walked beside their assimilated parents, cybernetic implants already sprouting from young flesh, their faces bearing that same expression of absolute serenity. Brother Kalen, formerly of the Blood Ravens, watched through the gunship's viewports and felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Revulsion so profound, it overrode even his transhuman conditioning. This is abomination beyond measure, he breathed. These are innocents, children, the Emperor's faithful. We're faithful, Kolvar corrected grimly. Now they serve a different god, the god of cold perfection. The Corvus Black Star descended toward the central complex, a massive structure that had been the planetary governor's palace 6 hours ago. Now it was a Borg processing facility, its Gothic architecture corrupted into geometric horror. Spires that once bore Aquilas now sprouted Borg alcoves. Stained glass windows depicting the Emperor's glory had been replaced with featureless black panels that pulsed with green light. The gunship's weapons, rotor cannons loaded with specialized Kraken bolts designed to defeat heavy armor, opened fire, tearing through drones that had detected their approach. The Death Watch dropped from the assault ramps before the craft even fully touched down, bolters roaring as they established a perimeter. Kolvar's centuries of combat experience cataloged the enemy immediately. Slower reaction time than Tyranid organisms, less tactical flexibility than Eldar, but utterly fearless and perfectly coordinated. Drones advanced through withering bolter fire with mechanical determination, their personal shields absorbing the first impacts before penetration. Concentrated fire, Kolvar commanded. Overwhelm their shielding, then advance. The Death Watch fought with brutal efficiency, each Marine a master of Xenos warfare. Brother Artemius's plasma incinerator vaporized 3 drones in a single blast, the superheated gas bypassing their shields through sheer thermal overload. Brother Kalen swept the courtyard with his heavy flamer, promethium converting the air itself into a killing zone. Drones burned, their augmetics melting in the 1,000-degree inferno. But for every drone destroyed, 2 more emerged from the structure. And Kolvar noticed something disturbing. The second wave moved differently. They dodged flamer arcs with calculated precision, took cover behind debris, concentrated fire on Brother Kalen's position specifically. The Collective had analyzed their tactics in real time and was already adapting. Inside now, Kolvar ordered. They breached the main entrance with melta charges, the ancient doorway vaporizing in a blast of nuclear-level heat. The Death Watch entered the corrupted palace in combat formation, their armor's auspex systems pinging constantly as they cataloged the nightmare within. The interior had been completely reorganized. Where there had been throne rooms and audience chambers, there were now vast halls filled with assimilation alcoves, vertical pods where drones stood in regenerative stasis. Thousands of them. The alcoves stretched away into darkness, each one containing what had been an Imperial citizen. "Throne of Terra," whispered Brother Artemius. "It's a processing facility. They're not just converting people, they're storing them, upgrading them." Kolvar spotted what they'd come for. A central chamber deeper within, where data streams of pure light flowed between processing nodes. That was where the facilities linked to the cube would be strongest. That was where the vortex charges would do maximum damage. They advanced through corridors that reconfigured around them, the facility itself adapting to their presence. Bulkheads sealed behind them, cutting off retreat. Side passages opened, disgorging drones with upgraded weapons, no longer just assimilation tubules, but energy weapons reverse-engineered from Imperial technology. Las fire and plasma bolts filled the corridors. Brother Kalen took a plasma blast to his pauldron, the shot penetrating his ceramite and scorching the flesh beneath. He grunted but didn't falter, returning fire with his bolter. "They're learning our weapons," he voxed. "These drones are carrying Imperial Guard pattern laser guns." Worse than that, they were using guard tactics. Covering fire, suppression patterns, coordinated advances. The Collective had assimilated thousands of PDF troopers and absorbed their military training. Now it deployed that knowledge with mechanical precision. The Death Watch reached the central chamber after a running battle that left a trail of destroyed drones behind them. The chamber itself was vast, easily 100 meters across, dominated by a central pillar of pure energy, a data conduit connecting this facility to the cube in orbit. Around the pillar, dozens of specialized drones worked at control surfaces, managing the flow of information. "Plant the charges," Kolvar ordered. "We have 90 seconds before they adapt to our presence enough to..." One of the specialized drones turned. Its face had been human once, a woman, middle-aged, wearing the tattered remnants of administratum robes. Now half her skull was cybernetic, her remaining eye replaced by a crimson optical sensor. When she spoke, her voice carried the harmonious chorus of the Collective. "We are the Borg. You are Death Watch. Space Marines. Elite warriors. Your tactical distinctiveness will be added to our own." She gestured, and every drone in the chamber turned to face them. "Resistance is futile. Detonation is inevitable," Kolvar replied, and opened fire. The Death Watch didn't fight. They executed, centuries of experience against impossible odds translated into brutal efficiency. Crack grenades demolished control surfaces. Dragonfire shells carved through specialized drones before they could adapt. Brother Artemius placed the first vortex charge with steady hands, its runes glowing as it armed itself. The facility responded. Bulkheads slammed down, attempting to seal the Death Watch in. The energy pillar's light intensified, and from it emerged something new. Drones wearing power armor. Kolvar's blood ran cold. He recognized that armor. Storm Warden's heraldry, corrupted with Borg modifications. These were the Space Marines captured during the initial engagement, now fully assimilated and deployed against their own kind. "Brothers," Kolvar shouted, "do not hesitate. These are already lost." The assimilated Storm Wardens moved with transhuman speed, but none of the fury that should accompany it. They fought with cold calculation, their centuries of combat experience channeled through the Collective's coordination. One of them raised a bolter. Brotherhood Brother Caltus according to Kolvar's armor database, and fired with perfect accuracy. Brother Artemius dodged, but the round clipped his leg, detonating against his knee joint. He fell, and 3 drones swarmed him. Assimilation tubules punched through his armor seals, finding flesh. Artemius screamed, not in pain, but in rage, and triggered his armor's self-destruct. The explosion vaporized him and the drones, but more importantly, it destroyed 2 of the central chamber's control nodes. The energy pillar flickered, and for a moment, the collective's coordination faltered. Now, Kolvar seized the opportunity. The remaining Death Watch placed their vortex charges in overlapping pattern around the chamber's perimeter. Each charge contained a tiny fragment of the warp itself, bound by Mechanicus technology and inquisitorial blessing. When detonated, they would tear holes in reality, pulling everything nearby into the Imperium. The assimilated Storm Wardens charged. Brother Kalen met them with his Thunderhammer, the weapon's power field crackling as it smashed into corrupted ceramite. The blow would have pulped a normal human. It staggered the Borg drone, but it didn't fall. Nanoprobes worked frantically to repair the damage, even as Kalen struck again. "Charges armed," shouted Brother Kolvar. "Extraction now." They ran. Behind them, the vortex charges began their countdown. 30 seconds. The facility's structure twisted and warped, trying to prevent their escape. Drones poured from alcoves, a tide of converted flesh and metal. The Death Watch fought through them with bolter and blade, each second critical. 20 seconds. Kolvar voxed the Corvus Black Star. "Extraction now. Building coming down." 15 seconds. They burst from the facility's entrance to find their gunship already hovering, assault ramps deployed. The pilot's voice crackled over the vox. "Contact in 3, 2, 10 seconds." The Death Watch leaped, mag boots slamming onto the ramps as the gunship's engines screamed. They rose skyward, gaining altitude as fast as the ancient machine could manage. 5 seconds. Behind them, the facility's energy pillar flared brilliant green, the collective realizing the danger and attempting to shut down the connection. Too late. The vortex charges detonated simultaneously. Reality tore. The central chamber ceased to exist in normal space-time, replaced by swirling holes into the warp itself. The Immaterium's touch was anathema to the Borg's ordered perfection, pure chaos meeting pure logic. Drones caught in the blast were pulled screaming into the warp, their consciousness shredded by demonic attention even as they were physically destroyed. The facility collapsed, pulled into itself as the vortex charges fed on surrounding matter. In seconds, 3 square kilometers of Borg infrastructure simply ceased to exist, replaced by a crater that burned with warp fire. Aboard the Absolute Conviction, Inquisitor Covenant watched the detonation through tactical displays and allowed herself a cold smile. Confirmed kill? Central processing facility destroyed. Her Savant Servitor reported. Estimated drone casualties, 42,000. Borg Cube response. Reallocation of resources to secondary facilities. They're recovering, Covenant observed. That hurt them, but it didn't stop them. How long until they've adapted to vortex weaponry? Unknown. Insufficient data. Covenant turned to her Master of Ordnance. Then we don't give them time to adapt. All ships, target the cube. Fire everything. The Inquisitorial battle group spoke with the voice of the Emperor's wrath. Nova cannons hurled warheads the size of Hab blocks at relativistic velocities. Lance batteries carved beams of coherent energy through the void. Torpedo spreads blanketed space with enough firepower to crack a continent. The Borg cube's shields flared, absorbing the bombardment. But these weren't Imperial Navy weapons. They were inquisitorial, blessed by tech priests, inscribed with prayers, maintained by fanatics who believed faith could make the impossible real. The shields held for 7 seconds. Then, they failed. The cube's hull ruptured in a dozen places. Atmosphere vented into space. Internal structures visible through the breaches showed significant damage. For the first time since arriving in this universe, the Borg Collective experienced something approximating surprise. This species possesses weapons significantly more advanced than initial estimates suggested. Adaptation required, immediate tactical withdrawal necessary to complete repairs, and the decision was instantaneous and unanimous. The Borg cube disengaged from Viridian V, its engines, hybrid fusion transwarp systems repaired with assimilated Imperial technology, burning as it accelerated away from the planet. Behind it, converted Imperial vessels formed a rearguard, sacrificing themselves to buy the cube time to escape. "They're retreating," Covenant's armsman said, disbelief evident in his voice. "They're actually retreating." "No," Covenant corrected, watching the cube's trajectory. "They're learning. We taught them that this universe can hurt them. Now they'll adapt." She paused, consulting star charts. "That heading takes them toward the Mordian system. Hive world. 40 billion souls. Emperor preserve us if they assimilate even a fraction of that population." She didn't need to finish the thought. Everyone on the bridge understood. The Borg had learned fear, but more dangerously, they'd learned respect. And a foe that respected you was far more dangerous than one that dismissed you. Below, on Viridian FIP, 5 million survivors looked up at the sky and wept with relief as the emerald lights faded. They'd been saved. But across the system, orbital monitors tracked the Borg cube's course and knew this was only the beginning. The Imperium had won a battle. The war for humanity's very existence had just begun. The warning reached Mordian 3 days before the Borg did. 3 days for a hive world of 40 billion souls to prepare for an enemy that turned people into machines and learned from every failed attack. 3 days to fortify a planet whose entire surface was covered in city sprawl, where every hab block housed 10,000 citizens, where the Astra Militarum's famed Iron Guard regiments maintained order through discipline so absolute it bordered on religious fervor. Lord General Casimir Tyrell stood in the Grand Strategium, a vast chamber deep within Mordian's planetary defense fortress, and watched hololithic displays catalog the approaching nightmare. The Borg cube was still 2 days out, but its trajectory was unmistakable. Around him, 50 of Mordian's finest military minds, generals, admirals, commissars, waited for his orders with parade ground stillness. Inquisitor Covenant's report describes an enemy that adapts in real time, Tyrell said, his voice carrying the parade ground rasp of a man who'd commanded armies for 60 years. "It learns our weapons, converts our people, turns our technology against us. Everything we know about warfare suggests we should evacuate." He let the word hang in the air. Evacuate. Abandon Mordian. 40 billion souls, loading onto transports that didn't exist, fleeing to destinations already overcrowded. The logistics alone were impossible, and Mordian was a fortress world. Its foundries produced ammunition for 50 sectors. Its regiments were among the Imperium's finest. Losing it would cripple Imperial military capacity across a quarter of the segmentum. "We don't evacuate," Tyrell continued. "We adapt faster than they do. If this enemy learns from combat, we give them lessons that destroy them. We make every victory they achieve a poison that weakens them, and we do it with the only advantage they can never assimilate: faith in the God Emperor. His words sparked something in the assembled officers. Not hope, but grim determination. Mordians didn't surrender. They died before they broke formation. If this was to be their last stand, they would make it worthy of the Tactica Imperium. Mobilize every regiment, Tyrell ordered. Flood the streets with soldiers. Fortify every approach. I want firing lines so dense the enemy can't advance without stepping over their own destroyed drones. Deploy every gun, every tank, every piece of ordnance we possess. When the Borg land, they'll face not a hive world, but a fortress continent. And if they adapt to massed lasgun fire? Asked General Korsova, commander of the 3rd Mordian Iron Guard. Then we switch to autoguns, then flamers, then bayonets if necessary. Tyrell's augmetic eye, a simple replacement, nothing like the Mechanicus miracles the rich could afford, focused on her. This enemy wants to assimilate us. I say we choke them, force them to adapt so many times, so rapidly, that their systems overload. Drown them in targets until they can't process them all. It was a desperate strategy. It would cost millions of lives. But it was the only strategy that made sense against an enemy that learned from limited engagements. Overwhelm them with variety, with volume, with the sheer chaotic unpredictability of Imperial Guard warfare. The orders went out across Mordian's planet-wide Vox network. Within 6 hours, 42 Iron Guard regiments, over 2 million soldiers, had deployed to defensive positions. Lasgun batteries were erected on every major thoroughfare. Anti-air installations tracked the sky with targeting solutions pre-calculated for geometric vessels. Priests of the Ministorum moved through the ranks, leading prayers that echoed through city canyons. Private Alexei Vorn stood in formation with his regiment, lasgun held at precise 45-degree angle, as regulations demanded. He was 19 years old, had completed his training 6 months prior, and had never fired his weapon at anything living. Around him, 50,000 soldiers stood in identical formation, the 88th Mordian Iron Guard, ready to defend their world. The soldiers didn't speak. Discipline forbade it. But Vorn could feel the tension radiating from every man and woman in formation. They'd all heard the reports. Enemies that couldn't be killed permanently, citizens turned into weapons, an entire hive world's population at risk. Soldiers of Mordian. Commissar Volkmar's voice boomed across the Vox, amplified to reach every ear. The enemy approaches. They believe they can convert us, transform us into components of their machine collective. They are wrong. We are Iron Guard. We do not break. We do not bend. And we sure as hell don't surrender our humanity to Xenos abominations. A roar erupted from 50,000 throats. Vorn found himself shouting with them, the fear transmuting into something fiercer. He was Mordian Iron Guard. He would hold his position. He would die before he failed. And the Borg cube entered Mordian's orbit 36 hours later. It didn't hide its approach, didn't use stealth, simply appeared at the edge of the system and accelerated toward the planet with mechanical inevitability. Orbital defense platforms opened fire immediately. Ancient weapons blessed by tech priests and maintained by crews who trained for this moment their entire lives. Macro cannon shells, each one the size of a Chimera transport, hammered into the cube's shields. The bombardment was relentless, coordinated by targeting cogitators that had fought void battles for 3 centuries. The cube's shields flared, held, and began to fail under the sustained assault. But the Collective had learned from Viridian. The cube didn't advance blindly into the defensive grid. Instead, it released the converted Imperial vessels it had brought from Viridian. 3 Navy cruisers, now bearing Borg modifications, their crews replaced by drones. These vessels, still broadcasting Imperial identification codes, penetrated the defensive grid more easily. The orbital platform commanders hesitated for 3 fatal seconds, uncertain whether these were reinforcements or threats. The converted vessels opened fire with weapons that combined Imperial and Borg technology. Lance batteries modified to pierce shields with geometric precision. 2 defense platforms died in the first salvo, their reactors breaching in miniature suns. The cube descended through the gap in the orbital defenses, its hull still bearing the scars from the inquisitorial bombardment at Viridian. As it entered Mordian's atmosphere, a thick, polluted miasma that turned the sky perpetually gray, it began reconfiguring. Sections of its structure detached, transforming mid-flight into smaller craft. Assimilation vessels, each one carrying hundreds of drones. They fell toward Mordian's surface like a mechanical rain. Lord General Tyrell watched the descent through tactical displays and felt something approximating peace. The enemy had committed. Now the butcher's bill would be paid. "All batteries," he commanded. "Fire." Mordian answered. Anti-air installations across the planet opened fire simultaneously. Hydra batteries, defense lasers, even pressed into service industrial equipment repurposed for war. The sky above Mordian became a grid of intersecting fire so dense it looked solid. Assimilation vessels died by the dozens, torn apart before they could land. But dozens weren't enough. Hundreds descended. Thousands. The cube was manufacturing them faster than Mordian could destroy them, extruding craft from its own mass like a hive producing offspring. The first assimilation vessel struck ground in Sector 7 Magnus, a commercial district housing 3 million civilians. It crashed through a manufactorum's roof, the impact killing 200 workers instantly. Drones emerged from the wreckage before the dust settled, their assimilation tubules extended. The workers ran. It didn't matter. The drones moved with inhuman speed, each one targeting a specific victim with calculated precision. Assimilation tubules found necks, wrists, any exposed flesh. Nanoprobes invaded bloodstreams. Within minutes, 300 workers had become 300 drones, and the infection was spreading. But this was Mordian. The PDF arrived within 7 minutes. 3 full companies, 1,500 soldiers in void-sealed armor, armed with laser guns and the absolute conviction that they would not fail. They found the assimilated workers shambling toward them with that characteristic Borg coordination. "Open fire," Captain Gregorius ordered. Las beams filled the street, concentrated fire that would have vaporized an orc mob. The assimilated workers' personal shields, hastily generated by nanoprobes still learning this universe's physics, flickered and failed. Bodies jerked and fell. For a moment, it seemed almost too easy. Then the second wave emerged from the manufactorum. These drones had adapted, their shields calibrated to last weapons. They advanced through fire that would have killed them seconds before. And their own hands had been transformed into las projectors, crude but functional. The PDF companies held formation, switching to solid slug autoguns as doctrine demanded. The drones fell again, but each fallen drone taught the collective something new. By the time the PDF had killed 500 assimilated civilians, the 600 had adapted to autogun fire as well. "Flamers!" Gregorius shouted, and Promethium lit the street. The drones burned. Nanoprobes couldn't adapt to 1,000-degree flames fast enough. This was working. This was. An assimilation vessel crashed through the PDF's position from above, having descended while they were distracted. Drones poured out, flanking the soldiers from behind. Assimilation tubules found gaps in void armor. Gregorius himself fell, feeling the cold invasion of nanoprobes, his last thoughts a prayer to the Emperor before his consciousness was absorbed into something vast and terrible. When the drone that had been Captain Gregorius stood and turned to assimilate his own men, it carried 60 years of Imperial Guard experience and tactical knowledge. The Collective added it to the growing database of military doctrine extracted from this universe's defenders. Across Mordian, the pattern repeated in 1,000 locations. Assimilation vessels landed, drones emerged, PDF forces engaged and were slowly, inevitably converted. Each battle taught the Borg more. Each fallen soldier added new tactical distinctiveness. The Collective was learning Mordian's defensive doctrine in real time, adapting faster than the defenders could adjust. But Tyrell had anticipated this. Phase 2, he commanded. Deploy the regiments. The Iron Guard had been waiting. While PDF forces fought and died, buying time, the true military strength of Mordian had been held in reserve. Now they moved, not as scattered companies, but as regimental blocks, entire armies moving with drill precision through Mordian's city canyons. The 88th Iron Guard advanced through Sector 7 Magnus in perfect formation, 50,000 soldiers marching in lockstep. Private Vorn saw the bodies, PDF and civilian both, some dead, some bearing the telltale cybernetic modifications of assimilation. He felt his stomach twist, but didn't break formation. Couldn't break formation. That was what separated Iron Guard from lesser regiments. Contact front, an officer called. Ahead, through the smoke and ruins, a mass of drones advanced. Thousands of them. Former PDF, former civilians, former everything, all moving with perfect coordination. First rank fire, Commissar Volkmar ordered. 5,000 laser guns spoke as one. The drone's shields failed under concentrated fire. Bodies fell in neat rows. Second rank, advance. First rank, reload. This was Mordian doctrine. Massed fire, rotation, unbreakable discipline. The 88th advanced over the bodies of their fallen enemies, firing in coordinated volleys that gave the Borg no time to adapt before the next wave hit. Where the PDF had fought in scattered companies, the Iron Guard fought as a single organism. The Collective analyzed this new approach with growing concern. Massed formations reduced the effectiveness of adaptation. By the time shields calibrated to one volley, the next was already incoming. The concentration of fire overwhelmed regeneration capabilities. This tactic was efficient. The Borg responded by changing their own approach. Instead of advancing in waves, drones began concentrating on single points in the Imperial formation, attempting to punch through with overwhelming local superiority. It worked. The 88th's left flank buckled as 300 drones focused their fire on a 50-meter section. "Commissar!" an officer shouted. "Left flank is... hold!" Volkmar drew his bolt pistol and shot a soldier who'd broken formation. The man's head exploded. "You hold, or you die. The Emperor demands it." The soldiers held. Those in the breach fought with bayonets when their laser guns failed, died standing rather than retreat. Their sacrifice bought time for the second and third ranks to wheel and pour fire into the Borg penetration. The drones were destroyed, but at terrible cost. An entire company, 500 souls, dead in under 2 minutes. Private Vorn found himself in the second rank now, his first rank having been rotated to the rear for reload. A drone emerged from the smoke directly ahead of him. A child, no more than 12, half its face replaced by cybernetics. It raised a hand, transformed into a crude las projector. Vorn fired without thinking. His last beam took the drone in the chest. It fell. He felt nothing, couldn't afford to feel anything. That hadn't been a child, not anymore. Just another target. The 88th Iron Guard pushed forward, stepping over the bodies of 10,000 drones. Behind them, the 89th and 90th regiments moved to support, 150,000 soldiers in total. This wasn't a battle. It was a systematic extermination. The Imperium's war machine grinding forward with industrial precision. But grinding was slow, and the Borg were spreading faster than the Iron Guard could contain them. For every sector secured, 3 more reported assimilation events. The cube itself had landed in Mordian's northern hemisphere, already beginning the systematic conversion of everything within 50 kilometers. Lord General Tyrell watched the tactical displays and calculated casualty projections. At this rate, Mordian would be entirely assimilated in 72 hours. The Iron Guard was fighting brilliantly, bleeding the Borg with every engagement. But brilliant wasn't enough. They needed a miracle. "Get me Inquisitor Covenant," Tyrell ordered. "And someone find out if the Mechanicus has anything that can kill that cube. Because if we don't end this in the next 2 days, there won't be a Mordian left to save." The miracle arrived not from the heavens, but from the deep places of the galaxy. As the Iron Guard bled for every meter of Mordian soil, a tear in reality opened 3 light minutes from the besieged world. It was not a warp rift. The signature was all wrong, a geometric precision that screamed of ancient alien science. From the wound in space emerged a fleet of impossible vessels, their hulls of living metal gleaming with captured starlight, their shapes a fusion of organic curves and crystalline sharpness. They were the Eldar, the ancient enemy of humanity, and they had come to Mordian not to save it, but to prevent a far greater catastrophe. Aboard the bridge of his flagship, the Wraith of Tears, Farseer Taldir of Craftworld, Ulthwé watched the tactical display with cold dread. The skeins of fate had become a tangled, screaming mess around this world. The Maquis were fighting as they always did, with brute force and stubborn defiance. But they were losing. The new enemy, this Borg, was a cancer in the tapestry of reality, a paradox of cold logic that threatened to unravel everything. It was an anathema to the Eldar, whose entire existence was built on the fluidity of emotion, art, and psychic potential. "The cube is grounded," her warlock attendant, Lyanna, reported, her voice a whisper of psychic harmony. "It has begun full planetary conversion. The Maquis defenses will collapse within 48 of their hours." "They fight with the subtlety of a rampaging orc," Taldir replied, her mind already sifting through 10,000 possible futures. In most, the Borg triumphed, absorbing Mordian and becoming an unstoppable force. In a few, the Imperium managed a Pyrrhic victory at the cost of the planet. In only a handful, a precious, fading few, did a path exist that did not lead to galactic damnation. But their stubbornness provides an opportunity. The collective's attention is divided. We will strike its heart. Strike alongside the humans. Lyanna's distaste was palpable. We will use the humans as a distraction. Their faith is a crude weapon, but a potent one against this enemy. It introduces variables, chaos, and chaos is the one thing this collective cannot process efficiently. Taldir's gaze fell upon a secondary display, showing a massive Orc Wah fleet, diverted from its course toward Armageddon by her subtle manipulations. And we are not the only ones who have noticed. The Orcs, drawn by the scent of the biggest fight in the sector, were already entering the system. Their ramshackle vessels burned toward Mordian with reckless abandon, their psychic field of energy creating a storm of pure, undirected violence in the warp. It was a dangerous gambit, inviting the orcs to the feast. But their unpredictable, illogical nature was the perfect foil for the Borg's cold adaptation. On the surface, Lord General Tyrell received the news with a mixture of fury and grim acceptance. The Xenos are here, Eldar and orcs. The Inquisition was right. This threat is galactic. Do we engage them, sir? His aide asked, voice trembling. No, Tyrell said, the word tasting like ash. Let them fight. Our enemy is the Collective. Redirect all forces to contain the primary assimilation zone, and get me a secure link to the Eldar vessel. The link was established, a crackling, unstable connection filled with the haunting echoes of alien technology and the screams of the dying world. Farseer, Tyrell began, discarding protocol. You are not here as allies. We are here to ensure the galaxy has a future, human. Taldir's voice was like silk over steel. Your species is a blight, but this is a sterilization. The Borg must not be allowed to assimilate the warp-sensitive population of this world. If they learn to harness the Imperium, all is lost. Then you have a plan to destroy the cube. Destruction is your solution to everything. It is why you are still children. The cube is a symptom. We must attack the disease, the hive mind itself. While the Eldar and the Imperium engaged in their tense, temporary truce, the Borg Collective was experiencing unprecedented dissonance. The assimilation of Mordian was proceeding at 87% of projected efficiency. The Iron Guard's shift to massed, disciplined volley fire had been countered by localized shield modulation and targeted drone swarming. The Collective was winning, but the new variables were problematic. The orcs, for instance. Their technology was crude, illogical, and constantly on the verge of failure. It should have been simple to adapt to their solid-shot cannons and explosive shells. Yet, the orcs themselves defied analysis. Their belief that their ramshackle weapons should work somehow made them more effective. A Borg drone's shield, calibrated to the precise energy output of an orc shotgun, would fail because the orc believed its next shot would be stronger. The Collective's predictive algorithms short-circuited in the face of such irrationality. Assimilated orcs were even worse. Their fungal biology was simple to incorporate, but their minds were a torrent of pure, violent instinct that created feedback loops in the hive mind, requiring immediate purging. Then there were the Eldar. Their technology was a symphony of psychic energy and impossible physics. Their weapons didn't just kill. They unraveled their targets at a molecular level, disrupting the nanoprobe's ability to regenerate. Their ships moved in ways that violated known laws of momentum. Most critically, every single Eldar possessed a psychic presence so bright, it was like a miniature star in the warp. Assimilating the first Eldar raiding party had been a catastrophic error. The moment the drones had injected their nanoprobes, the captured Eldar's souls had flared like supernovas. The resulting psychic backblast had torn through the hive-mind connection, not as demonic corruption, but as pure, undiluted emotion. Centuries of grief, joy, passion, and sorrow unleashed in a single, devastating moment. An entire sub-collective of 2,000 drones had been rendered catatonic, their neural pathways scorched by a flood of feeling they had no capacity to process. The Borg had been forced to jettison the entire section of the cube. The Collective was learning a terrifying truth. This universe was not logical. Its fundamental forces were faith, emotion, and belief. These were not quantifiable variables. They could not be adapted to through conventional means. Aboard the cube, deep within its newly assimilated core, what had once been the heart of Mordian's primary cathedral, the Collective initiated a radical new protocol. Designation: Project Ascension. If the Borg could not process these chaotic elements, they would transcend them. They would create a new form of drone, one that could interface with the warp without being destroyed by it. Using data assimilated from Mordian's sanctioned psychers and the captured Eldar, the Borg began construction of a specialized assimilation chamber. This one was not designed for physical conversion, but for spiritual binding. The goal was to strip a psycher's soul of its chaotic emotional content and harness its raw power as a controlled energy source. It was the ultimate perversion, turning a soul into a battery. The first test subject was a beta-level psyker captured during the fall of Hive Secundus. The man, whose name had been Orion, was secured in the chamber, his terror a palpable force that made the air hum. Assimilation tubules, now inscribed with runes reverse-engineered from Eldar wraithbone, pierced his flesh. Nanoprobes, specially engineered to interface with neural pathways connected to the Imperium, flooded his system. For a moment, the Collective witnessed the warp through a mortal's eyes, a terrifying, beautiful, infinite ocean of possibility and madness. Then, the binding protocols engaged. The Borg hive mind, an entity of pure order, attempted to force this chaotic energy into a predictable, usable stream. It worked. For exactly 4.7 seconds, the cube's power output increased by 500%. New drones, constructed with a faint psychic resonance, displayed a resistance to Eldar weapons. The Collective had found the key. Then it went horribly wrong. The act of binding a soul did not go unnoticed in the warp. The desperate final scream of Orion's captured spirit was a beacon in the Imperium, and something answered. Not a demon of chaos, but something far more terrifying to the Borg. A null space, an absence of existence. A Ceton shard, slumbering in a Necron tesseract vault on a world 1,000 light-years away, stirred at the sensation of a soul being forcibly mechanized. It was an echo of its own, ancient hunger. And in the depths of the galaxy, the silent, ancient legions of the Necrons also took notice. The Borg, in their quest for perfection, were tampering with the fundamental relationship between the material and the immaterial. This, the Necrons would not allow. On the bridge of the Wraith of Tears, Farseer Taldir gasped, clutching her chest. The vision was so sharp it drew blood from her nose. She saw not just the Borg, but the consequences of their actions. A waking galaxy of sleeping giants. "The calculus has changed," she whispered, her voice raw. "We are not just fighting for this world. We are fighting to prevent a war that would shatter the stars." She opened a channel to Lord General Tyrell, all pretense of superiority gone. "Human, listen carefully. Your planet is already lost, but we can still save your species. The Borg are attempting to weaponize souls. They must be stopped now, before they attract the attention of things far worse than chaos." On the surface, Tyrell stood amidst the ruins of his command bunker, the sounds of a dying world echoing around him. He looked at the hologram of the aloof Eldar, then at the tactical display showing his armies in full, bloody retreat. He had sworn to defend Mordian to the last man, but he had also sworn to protect the Imperium of Man. "What?" he asked, his voice heavy with the weight of 40 billion souls. "Do you need me to do?" The air in the command bunker was thick with ozone and despair. Lord General Tyrell's question hung between them, a bridge across an abyss of mutual hatred and necessity. On the flickering hololith, Farseer Taldir's alien features were unreadable, but the urgency in her psychic voice was unmistakable. "The cube has become the nexus," she imparted, the words forming directly in his mind. "It is no longer just a vessel. It is a spiritual focal point, a blasphemous engine attempting to bind the warp to its will. Conventional assault is useless. It has adapted to your ballistics, your energy weapons, your explosives. It is now learning to adapt to faith itself." Tyrell's augmetic eye whirred as he processed this. "Then what remains?" "A paradox," Taldir replied. "You must attack it with something it has already assimilated. Something it believes it understands completely, and therefore something for which it will not maintain active defenses." Tyrell stared, uncomprehending for a moment, before the horrific understanding dawned. The assimilated, our own people. Precisely. The Borg view assimilated drones as integrated components. Their systems are trusted. Their access is unimpeded. A virus does not attack from outside the body. It hides within the cells until it is too late. You're asking me to send my own, converted citizens on a suicide mission back into the heart of that thing. I am stating it is the only path to victory that does not end with this cube becoming a god machine that consumes the galaxy. The Collective's greatest strength is its unity. We must use that unity against it. We will provide the vector, a psychic virus, a mimetic weapon of pure, concentrated emotion. Your people will be the delivery system." Tyrell turned from the hololith, his gaze sweeping over the grim faces of his remaining staff. He saw the revulsion, the horror. To use the lost in such a way was a desecration. It was heresy. But was it a greater heresy than allowing the Borg to succeed? "How?" he asked, his voice a gravelly whisper. "My warlocks will identify a concentration of drones being reintegrated into the cube for system upgrades. Your forces will capture them alive. We will modify them. Then you will allow them to be retrieved. What happens next will be beyond any of our control." The operation was designated Judgment Price. It was the most morally repugnant order Tyrell had ever given. On the front lines, the 88th Iron Guard, now reduced to a battered third of its original strength, received the new orders with numb confusion. They were to cease exterminating drones on sight. They were to use specialized, non-lethal shock mauls and net launchers, weapons scavenged from enforcer precincts, to capture them. Private Alexei Vorn found himself part of a 10-man capture team, staring down a single drone shambling through the ruins of a hab block. It had been a woman, her face still recognizably human, save for the cybernetic implant crawling over her left eye. Her movements were jerky, her personal shield flickering, a recent assimilation, not yet fully integrated. "Net her," the sergeant barked. Vorn fired the heavy net launcher. The weighted cables enveloped the drone, and a powerful electric charge coursed through them, disrupting its motor functions. It fell, twitching. As they moved to secure it, the drone's one human eye fixed on Vorn. There was no plea there, no hatred. Just nothing. An empty vessel. It was somehow worse than if it had been screaming. They dragged 6 such drones back to a hastily established forward operating base, a converted shrine that now housed a circle of Eldar warlocks. The Xenos moved with an unnerving grace, their focus absolute. They did not look at the Imperial soldiers, their attention solely on the captured drones secured to the shrine's pillars. What followed was not a ritual of technology, but of spirit. The warlocks did not touch the drones. Instead, they began a low, melodic chant, their hands weaving patterns in the air that left trails of faint light. The atmosphere grew heavy, charged with a pressure that made Vorn's teeth ache. He saw the drones begin to convulse, not in pain, but as if something were stirring deep within their hollowed-out souls. Lyanna, Taldir's attendant, approached the lead drone, the woman Vorn had captured. She placed a single, delicate finger on the drone's forehead. A tremor ran through the drone's body, and for a single, heart-stopping second, its human eye widened. A flicker of pure, unadulterated terror shone in its depths. A ghost in the machine, a final spark of the person who had once been. Then it was gone, and the eye went blank again. But something had changed. A faint, psychic resonance now emanated from the drones, a scent of something sweet and rotten. "It is done," Lyanna announced, her voice thin with strain. "The mimetic weapon is seated. It is a conceptual bomb, wrapped in the memory of individual selfhood. The collective, which knows only we, cannot process the sudden, violent reassertion of I. Release them. The cube is already calling them home." The soldiers cut the drones loose. As one, they turned and began shambling back in the direction of the landed cube, their movements regaining that perfect, coordinated purpose. All they could do now was wait. Aboard the Borg cube, the captured drones were retrieved by assimilation patrols and routed to central processing. They were scanned, their nanoprobe levels checked, their recent experiences uploaded to the collective. The data was routine: capture, brief containment, release. The Eldar psychic signature was detected, but categorized as residual energy from proximity, not an internal threat. The drones were, for all intents and purposes, clean. They were reassigned to maintenance conduits deep within the cube's power distribution network. The mimetic weapon, a psychic time bomb crafted from the echoes of 40 billion stolen lives, was now inside the fortress. Project Ascension continued. The Borg Collective, having stabilized the process, began mass assimilation of Mordian psychers. The specialized chambers hummed with captive warp energy, the souls within being systematically broken and wired into the cube's growing psychic network. The cube's own presence in the warp was changing, shifting from a null space of logic to a bizarre, ordered domain that was anathema to the native chaos. It was building its own version of the Imperium, a sterile, predictable dimension. It was at the peak of this process. As the collective focused its immense processing power on harnessing the sixth dimension, that the bomb detonated. It began not with an explosion, but with a thought. A single drone, performing routine maintenance on a power conduit, suddenly stopped. Its designation was 4 of 12, tertiary adjunct. It had been Magos Explorator Kalen of the Adeptus Mechanicus. For a nanosecond, the mimetic trigger implanted by the warlocks flared to life. The drone's mind, a seamless part of the chorus of the collective, was violently and irrevocably severed. "I am Kalen," the thought screamed in the silence of its own skull. "I serve the Omnissiah." The shock was not the thought itself, but the sheer, isolated intensity of it. The concept of a singular, sovereign I was a cognitive poison to the hive mind. The drone, Kalen, staggered, clutching its head as decades of individual memory and identity flooded back, crashing against the wall of the collective's presence. The Borg Collective registered the anomaly instantly. 4 of 12 was experiencing a critical cascade failure. Standard protocol: isolate and purge. But before the order could be executed, the mimetic virus did what it was designed to do. It replicated. The psychic shockwave of Kalen's resurgent individuality rippled outwards through the hive mind, a cognitive plague traveling at the speed of thought. It jumped to the drone beside him, then to the next. In less than a second, the entire maintenance sector was screaming. I am Hester. I had a farm on Viridian 7. I am Liana. My son's name was Milo. I am Brother Caltus of the Storm Wardens, for the Emperor. The collective was under attack from within by the very distinctiveness it sought to add to itself. The sudden, chaotic reassertion of millions of individual wills created a feedback loop of pure psychological trauma in the hive mind. Systems faltered, power fluctuated. The orderly flow of data became a screaming bedlam of conflicting memories, desires, and regrets. On the surface, the effect was immediate and visible. The Borg drones advancing on the Imperial lines suddenly froze. Some collapsed, writhing. Others turned on each other, their perfect coordination shattered as individual survival instincts overrode the collective will. The emerald lights across the cube's surface flickered erratically. Now, Farseer Taldir's command echoed across the Vox. The shield is down. The mind is wounded. Strike! Every remaining Imperial artillery piece, every Eldar pulsar, every Orc cannon that could bear on the target opened fire. Without its adaptive shields and unified consciousness to coordinate repairs, the Borg cube was suddenly terribly vulnerable. Lance beams carved deep into its hull. Pulsar fire vaporized entire sections. A massive Orc rocket propelled by little more than belief in explosives slammed into the central spire, blowing it apart in a shower of molten metal and shrieking drones. The collective was reeling, fighting a war on two fronts, against the physical assault from without and the psychological apocalypse from within. For the first time, the thought that was the Borg Collective knew something akin to panic. Its perfect logical universe was being torn apart by the very chaos it had sought to eliminate. It began emergency purges, severing entire sub-collectives, sacrificing tens of thousands of drones to stop the spread of the mimetic plague. But the damage was done. The paradox had been introduced. The hive mind was no longer one. It was a mind at war with itself. The path to the core was open. The silence was the first sign of true victory. The constant grinding hum of the Borg infrastructure that had become the background noise of Mordian's death rattle faltered, sputtered, and in many sectors, died completely. The flickering green lights that had painted the night sky like a constellation of damnation winked out, plunging vast swathes of the hive into an eerie, battle-lit darkness. The drones in the streets did not simply fall, they unraveled. Some stood motionless, their internal conflict rendering them catatonic. Others tore at their own cybernetics with newfound individual horror, while a few, their Imperial training resurfacing, even turned their weapons on other drones. On the bridge of the Wraith of Tears, Farseer Taldir allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction. The mimetic weapon had worked beyond their projections. The Borg Collective was experiencing a systemic psychosis, but she could feel the cube's core consciousness, wounded and reeling, beginning to stabilize. It was purging infected drone clusters with brutal efficiency, sacrificing billions of bytes of accumulated knowledge to save the whole. The window was closing. The beast is wounded, not slain, she voxed to the Imperial command channel. Its logic is reasserting itself. If it contains the psychological breach, it will adapt to this form of attack. We will not get a second chance. Lord General Tyrell watched the tactical displays from his bunker. The path to the grounded cube, once a solid wall of adaptive death, was now a fractured, chaotic battlefield. Then we send in the kill team. Now. He turned to a figure who had been standing in the shadows, silent and imposing. Sergeant Kolvar. The Death Watch is the Emperor's scalpel. It is time to cut out this cancer's heart. Sergeant Kolvar's Corvus Blackstar screamed through the turbulent skies, weaving between the erratic fire of confused Borg anti-air emplacements. Below, the landscape was a testament to the Borg's brief, terrible reign. The Gothic architecture of Mordian was fused with stark, geometric additions, a schizophrenic blend of faith and cold logic. The Black Star didn't land. It hovered over a massive breach torn in the cube's hull by the recent orbital bombardment, and the Death Watch squad rappelled down into the darkness. The interior was a charnel house of the mind. The air vibrated with dissonance. One moment, the Death Watch's auspex would show a corridor clear of life signs. The next, it would scream with the conflicting biosignatures of 1,000 individuals fighting for control of their own bodies. Drones stumbled past them, ignoring the Space Marines entirely, some weeping, others chanting Imperial prayers, a few simply repeating their own names like a mantra. The Xenos weapon. It's creating heretics and saints down here, Brother Kalen muttered, his flamer panning across a scene of horrific violence where drones had turned on each other with assimilation tubules and bare hands. They are all lost, Kolvar stated, his voice cold. Our mission is the core. Do not be distracted. They moved deeper, following Auspex readings toward the cube's power signature. The further they went, the more the environment changed. The chaotic blend of Imperial and Borg design gave way to pure, unadulterated Borg architecture. The air grew colder, the hum of machinery more focused. Here, the mimetic plague had been contained. Drones moved with purpose again, but their coordination was slower, more deliberate, as if the collective was thinking with a concussion. They encountered their first organized resistance at a vast chamber designated as a primary nexus. These were not the confused drones of the outer hull. These were the cube's protectors, assimilated storm wardens, their power armor now fused with Borg technology, their movement still bearing the ghost of transhuman grace. They raised their weapons, a hideous fusion of bolters and energy projectors. They have adapted to our previous tactics, Kolvar warned. Do not repeat them. The Death Watch fought not as a single unit, but as 5 individual masters of war, each employing a different, unpredictable style. Kolvar used hit-and-run attacks with his stalker pattern bolter, never firing from the same position twice. Brother Kalen used his flamer not to kill, but to create walls of fire, cutting the drones off from each other and breaking their coordination. Another Marine, Brother Zale, used a Volkite charger, its disintegrating beam a weapon the Borg had no prior data on. It was a brutal, costly advance. Brother Zale fell, his chest cavity vaporized by a concentrated plasma blast from 3 drones firing in perfect unison. But with his death, the collective gained no new data on Volkite technology. The Death Watch was learning too. They breached the Nexus and found their way into the core systems. The chamber was immense, dominated by a central processing pillar that glowed with a sickly green light, its surface crawling with data streams. And there, linked directly to the pillar by dozens of thick, organic-looking cables, was the Borg Queen. She was both a single entity and the voice of the collective. Her lower body was fused with a mechanical armature that connected her to the core, while her upper body retained a ghastly semblance of a human woman, pale and elegant. Her features a composite of 1,000 assimilated beauties. One eye was a piercing, intelligent blue. The other was a crimson optical sensor. She turned her head as the Death Watch entered, her expression one of cold curiosity rather than alarm. "Sergeant Kolvar of the Death Watch," she said, her voice a harmonious chorus that echoed in the chamber. "You are more persistent than our projections indicated. You have utilized irrational, emotional warfare. A fascinating, if inefficient, tactic." Kolvar leveled his bolter. "Your reign ends here, Xenos." "Reign?" The Queen's lips curved into a faint, condescending smile. "We do not reign. We perfect. You have shown us the destructive potential of the individual will, a valuable, if painful, lesson. We have already begun formulating counter-strategies. This temporary dissonance will be resolved. Perfection is inevitable." As she spoke, Kolvar saw the data streams on the central pillar begin to stabilize. The mimetic plague was being systematically identified and quarantined. The Borg were adapting to the concept of individuality itself, creating new firewalls in their hive mind. "You see?" the Queen said. "Resistance is not futile. It is educational. But all lessons must end." From alcoves around the chamber, a new type of drone emerged. They were larger, their armor thicker, and they moved with a predatory intelligence that the others lacked. These were the Queen's personal guard, assimilated from the most formidable warriors the Borg had encountered, including Death Watch veterans from other squads lost in earlier engagements. "The Emperor protects," Kolvar growled and opened fire. The battle in the core chamber was a microcosm of the larger war. The Death Watch, with their unpredictable, individualistic tactics, against the Borg, with their cold, adaptive logic. It was a stalemate of blood and metal. Bolter shells ricocheted, energy beams seared the air. Brother Kalen died, dragged down by 3 guards who adapted to his flamer's heat signature by rotating their shield frequencies. Kolvar fought his way toward the Queen, his mind racing. They couldn't win this fight. The Borg would learn from every move, every shot. They had to break the cycle. He saw it then, a control node near the base of the Queen's armature, flickering with the same chaotic energy as the drones affected by the mimetic plague. The node was struggling, not fully integrated. The Queen's connection to the collective was not yet fully secure. "Brothers," he voxed. "The node at her base, all fire." The remaining Death Watch Marines redirected their fire, a storm of bolt, plasma, and melta converging on the flickering console. The Queen's serene expression finally broke. "A logical deduction," she stated, even as warning runes flashed across her interface. But too late. The node exploded and the Queen screamed, a sound of pure data stream corruption. Her connection to the wider collective faltered for a critical second. The guard drones hesitated, their coordination broken. In that second, Kolvar charged. He didn't fire his weapon. He didn't use a grenade. He used the one thing the Borg could never anticipate. The one weapon they had no defense against because they could not comprehend it. A final, willing, individual sacrifice. He slammed his power fist into the base of the Queen's armature, not to destroy it, but to engage the magnetic lock. Then he triggered his Rosarius, the powerful force field enveloping both him and the Queen in a bubble of shimmering energy. "What are you doing?" the Queen demanded, her voice for the first time lacking its harmonious certainty. "Teaching you one last lesson," Kolvar said, his voice grim through his helmet's vox. "The lesson of the martyr." He overcharged his armor's power core. The Borg could adapt to any weapon. They could not adapt to a warrior who chose to become a bomb, who valued a single, meaningful death over 1,000 logical victories. The light that consumed them was not green nor red, but the pure, blinding white of a dying star. The psychic shockwave of the Queen's severance and death rippled outwards through the wounded hive mind. It was the final, critical blow to a system already on the brink. Without its central guiding intelligence, the collective's efforts to contain the mimetic plague collapsed. The Borg cube on Mordian did not explode. It simply stopped. Every light on its surface died. Every drone in its corridors and on the battlefield below fell, their cybernetics going dark. The great geometric edifice, which had torn its way into their universe seeking perfection, became nothing more than a silent, cold mountain of metal and dead flesh, entombing the last stand of the Death Watch and the final, illogical victory of individual will over collective mind. The battle for Mordian was over. Victory on Mordian was a pyre, not a parade. The silence that fell over the hive world was the silence of the grave, broken only by the crackle of fires and the distant, isolated skirmishes as Imperial forces cleansed the last pockets of dormant drones. The great cube sat dark and cold upon the northern plains, a tomb for billions and a monument to a cost too terrible to calculate. 40 billion souls had called Mordian home. Best estimates suggested less than 4 million survived, huddled in fortified enclaves, their minds and worlds shattered. But the war was not over. It had merely changed theaters. The death of the Queen and the collapse of the local collective on Mordian was not the end of the Borg. It was a catastrophic system failure, a severed limb. The greater body, the true Borg Collective spanning the void between realities, felt the loss. The transwarp conduit that had brought the cube to the 41st millennium had been damaged, but it was not destroyed. It had stabilized into a faint, bleeding wound in reality at the edge of the system, a gateway. And through that gateway, the true scale of the threat became horrifyingly clear. Aboard the Wraith of Tears, Farseer Taldir stared into her scrying pool, her face a mask of despair. The visions were no longer tangled, they were horrifically clear. The silence was a deception, she whispered to the empty chamber. We cut the head from the serpent, but the body has many more. The augur arrays of the surviving Imperial and Eldar vessels confirmed it. The conduit was active, and something was coming through. Not another cube, something far worse. They were planets, or rather, planetoids, massive geometric bodies, their surfaces crawling with the same industrial architecture as the cube, but on a scale that dwarfed it. World engines. 6 of them emerged from the conduit in a precise, terrifying formation, each one larger than Mordian's moon. They did not broadcast threats or demands. They simply began to move, their trajectories calculated for maximum systemic destruction. One headed for the system's star, its purpose chillingly obvious: to destabilize it and deny the star to the Imperium forever. 2 others moved to flank the remaining Imperial and Eldar fleet, while the final 3 began a slow, inexorable advance toward Mordian itself, not to assimilate, but to dismantle. The Borg had learned that this universe was too chaotic, too dangerous to assimilate conventionally. Their new objective was sterilization. They're not here for our distinctiveness anymore. Inquisitor Covenant voxed, her flagship joining the tattered remnants of the Imperial and Eldar armada. They're here to delete us. They've categorized this reality as a pathogenic anomaly. They're sanitizing the infection. The grim truth settled on the survivors. The Borg had adapted their ultimate goal. Perfection was no longer assimilation. Perfection was the elimination of the imperfect. They had become the universe's immune system, and humanity was the virus. On the surface, Lord General Tyrell received the news with the hollowed-out calm of a man who had already lost everything. His command bunker was now little more than a reinforced cave, the air thick with dust and defeat. The reports of the world engines were the final, crushing weight. "There is no fighting that," one of his junior officers said, his voice breaking. "There is always a fight," Tyrell replied, but the fire was gone from his voice. He looked at the haggard faces around him. They had given everything. There was nothing left to give. It was then that a new presence registered on the system's edge. Not Borg, not Imperial, not Eldar. The Necrons had arrived. A fleet of silent, impossible vessels, hewn from living metal that drank the light from the stars, translated into real space, with an absence of drama that was more terrifying than any warp eruption. They were ancient, patient, and utterly merciless. They did not hail the Imperium or the Eldar. They simply assessed the situation with sensors that had been old when humanity was crawling from the primordial ooze. The lead ship, a massive Scythe-class harvester, oriented itself toward the nearest Borg world engine. A single focused beam of emerald energy lanced out, a weapon that unmade its target at the atomic level. A significant portion of the world engine's surface simply ceased to exist. The Borg, for the first time, encountered a technology that was not merely advanced, but fundamentally opposed to their own existence. The Necron Gauss weaponry didn't just kill, it erased. There was nothing to adapt to, no energy signature to analyze. It was deletion, pure and simple. The Collective shifted its priorities instantly. The Necrons represented the primary threat. The chaotic biological races were secondary. The three world engines advancing on Mordian altered course to engage the Necron fleet. What followed was a battle of gods. The Borg world engines unleashed torrents of adapted energy weapons and cutting beams that had vaporized Imperial battleships. The Necron fleet weathered the storm, their regeneration protocols repairing damage almost as fast as it was inflicted. In return, the Necrons fired volleys of Gauss beams and strange temporal weapons that aged sections of the world engines into dust. The Imperium and the Eldar were reduced to spectators in their own apocalypse, their remaining ships scrambling to avoid the crossfire of two technological titans. It was Farseer Taldir who saw the opportunity, the single fragile thread of hope in the tapestry of annihilation. "The Borg are fully committed," she communicated to Covenant and Tyrell. "Their processing power is dedicated to the Necron threat. Their guard is down. The conduit, it is vulnerable." "Vulnerable to what?" Covenant demanded. "We've thrown everything we have at them." "Not everything," Taldir said, her mind reaching out across the void, toward a presence she had been tracking since the first Borg emergence. A presence of pure, undirected, galactic-scale violence. "We use a key to break the lock, or in this case, a battering ram." The Orc Wa that had been drawn to the system had been having the time of its life, crashing their cruisers into the smaller Borg vessels and loving the fight. But now, their war boss, Git Snaka, was growing frustrated. The big metal boxes were ignoring them, fighting the shiny Gits instead. It wasn't a proper scrap if you weren't the main event. It was then that a vision, crude and powerful, filled Gitsnaka's mind, a vision of the biggest, meanest fight imaginable, waiting just on the other side of the shiny hole in space. The vision showed him crashing through the hole and finding a universe full of these metal boxes, all waiting to be fought. It was the ultimate wah. "Dat way, boys!" Gitsnaka bellowed across the Vox, pointing a meaty finger toward the transwarp conduit. "The biggest fight is through dat door. Wag!" The entire Orc fleet, a chaotic swarm of ramshackle vessels held together by spit, belief, and stolen plating turned as one. They abandoned the battle with the Borg and Necrons and made a beeline for the conduit. They didn't try to analyze it or shut it down. They simply aimed for the center and poured on the speed, their collective psychic wah energy creating a reality-distorting field around them. The Borg, focused on the existential threat of the Necrons, had no protocols for this. The Orcs were not attacking the conduit with weapons. They were using themselves as the weapon. Their approach was so illogical, so counter to any rational strategy, that the Borg's defensive algorithms categorized it as a low-priority anomaly until it was too late. The leading Orc cruiser, the Fist of Gork, slammed into the center of the transwarp conduit. The result was not a simple collision. The Orc Wah field, a tempest of belief and violence, met the ordered, logical energy of the transwarp conduit. Logic and chaos did not mix. The conduit ruptured. Reality screamed. The delicate balance of exotic energies that held the gateway open collapsed in on itself, triggering a chain reaction that consumed the entire Orc fleet in a vortex of raw, destructive power. The resulting shockwave tore through the system, blinding sensors and sending ships tumbling. When the light faded, the conduit was gone. The Borg world engines were cut off from their source, stranded in a hostile universe. The Necrons, their primary objective achieved, the containment of the extra-dimensional threat, did not linger. Their fleet disengaged, vanishing as silently as they had arrived, leaving the crippled Borg world engines to the tender mercies of the remaining Imperial and Eldar forces. The final act of the Mordian cataclysm was an execution, the combined, vengeful firepower of two races who had lost everything bombarded the stranded world engines until they were nothing more than expanding clouds of debris. The Borg invasion had been stopped. But as the last world engine broke apart, every psyker in the system, from the lowliest Imperial astropath to Farseer Taldir herself, felt a final, cold pulse of data from the dying collective, a message not of defeat, but of conclusion. Analysis complete. Subject universe, hostile, irredeemable, pathogenic. Designation, Omega. Recommended long-term solution, sterilization. File for future reference. The Borg were gone. But they had not forgotten. The silence after the storm was the most profound sound Inquisitor Covenant had ever heard. It was the silence of a butchered world, of 40 billion ghosts, of a fleet reduced to floating scrap. Her flagship, the Pious Fury, drifted in the Mordian system's graveyard orbit, surrounded by the mangled remains of Imperial, Eldar, and Borg vessels. The great world engines were dust, their annihilation a victory that felt like ashes in the mouth. On the surface, what was left of the Mordian Iron Guard moved through the corpse hush of the hive cities. They were no longer an army, but a burial detail. They did not find many bodies to bury. The Borg left little behind, stripped bones, discarded personal effects, and the chilling geometric architecture that now scarred the planet. The dominant smell was not decay, but ozone and cold metal. Lord General Tyrell walked through the ruins of his command bunker, his uniform tattered, his augmetic eye dark. The weight of his survival was a heavier burden than any defeat. In the strategic void left by the battle, the fragile alliance shattered. The Eldar fleet, without a word or transmission, vanished into the webway. Their purpose was served. The immediate threat was neutralized. They would return to their craft worlds to watch the skeins of fate, knowing a new, terrible variable had been introduced to the galaxy's equation. The Orcs were gone, consumed in their glorious, universe-breaking charge. The Necrons had withdrawn to their tomb worlds, their ancient, inscrutable judgment past. Only the Imperium remained, alone amidst the wreckage of its victory. Weeks turned into months. The first priority was quarantine. The entire Mordian system was declared perdita, lost to the Imperium. Every ship that had fought in the battle was subjected to rigorous purification rites. Any vessel showing the slightest sign of Borg nanite contamination was scuttled. Crew members were screened, interrogated, and in some cases, executed on the suspicion of latent assimilation. The Death Watch established a permanent garrison on the dead cube. Its dark halls now a cursed labyrinth where teams of tech priests and space marines worked to dismantle and study the Xenos technology, their work shrouded in the utmost secrecy. It was within the cube's dark heart that the first discovery was made, one that sent a chill through the highest echelons of the Ordo Xenos. The Borg's data logs, though heavily corrupted, were partially recoverable. They contained more than just schematics and adaptation protocols. They contained a map. It was not a map of stars, but of realities. A cosmic cartography of the multiverse, with their point of origin clearly marked. And alongside it, the final chilling analysis of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Universe designation, Omega. Primary analysis. Reality is fundamentally unstable, governed by parasitic emotional resonance, designation, warp, and belief-based physics. Dominant species, Homo sapiens, are biologically primitive but psychically volatile, utilizing technology based on superstition and reverse engineering. Threat assessment, maximum. Culture is inherently expansionist and self-destructive. Technological progression is stagnant yet dangerously unpredictable due to warp interaction. Species exhibits fanatical resistance to logical perfection. Conclusion: assimilation is inefficient. Biological and technological distinctiveness, while considerable, is corrupted by immaterial variables. Long-term solution: sterilization via reality collapse or stellar manipulation. Data archived for collective future reference. Status: retreat. Conduit lost. Local collective terminated. Further incursion requires significant resource allocation. The Borg were not coming back. Not because they were defeated, but because they had judged the 41st millennium not worth the effort. They had filed the Imperium of Man away as a failed, toxic experiment. A problem to be solved with galactic-scale extermination at a later date. The humiliation of this was a deeper wound than any physical defeat. The second discovery was more immediate and more terrifying. Deep within the cube's biolabs, the Mechanicus found the remains of Project Ascension. They found the hollowed-out psychers, their souls used as batteries. And they found the research. The Borg had not just been trying to harness the warp. They had been trying to rationalize it, to create a predictable, mathematical framework for the Immaterium. Their notes, though incomplete, suggested it was possible. In the wrong hands, this was a weapon that could make the Age of Strife look like a minor disturbance, a way to systematize sorcery, to weaponize faith with the precision of a laser gun. A year after the battle, Inquisitor Covenant stood on the observation deck of a newly constructed orbital fortress overlooking Mordian. The planet below was a tomb, its skies permanently stained with the particulate of its own annihilation. Beside her, a hololith of Farseer Taldir flickered. "The threat is not over," Taldir said, her voice devoid of its usual arrogance, filled only with grim certainty. "It has evolved. You have their knowledge now. The desire for order, for cold perfection. It is a seductive poison. Your Mechanicus already hungers for what they left behind." "And your kind does not?" Covenant countered. We remember the fall. We know the price of reaching for perfection. You humans, you never learn. The hololith faded. Covenant was alone. She held a data slate containing the Borg's final analysis. Universe designation, Omega. They saw the Imperium as a failed, pathetic experiment, a madhouse of a universe. And in her darkest moments, surrounded by the evidence of her species' capacity for fanatical, brutal, self-destructive violence, she wondered if they were right. The Borg had been stopped, but they had left something behind far more dangerous than any nanoprobe or cutting beam. They had left an idea. The idea that the Imperium's eternal war, its faith, its very way of life, was not a noble struggle, but a symptom of a cosmic disease. They had left the seed of doubt. And as she looked down at the dead world, Inquisitor Covenant of the Ordo Xenos knew, with cold, absolute clarity, that some infections are not of the body, but of the soul. The Borg were gone, but the memory of their cold, logical judgment would linger, a ghost in the machine of the Imperium forever. The collision between the Borg Collective and the Warhammer 40,000 universe was not a war of annihilation, but a catastrophic cultural and philosophical exchange. The Borg, entities of pure logic and enforced unity, encountered a reality where faith was armor, madness was power, and individuality was a weapon to be wielded unto self-immolation. They came seeking perfection through assimilation and left having classified the entire Grimdark future as a failed state. A cosmic anomaly too chaotic and self-contradictory to be worth the effort of integration. The victory for the Imperium was Pyrrhic in the most profound sense. They saved the galaxy from immediate assimilation, but at the cost of a hive world and the revelation of their own grotesque nature reflected in the cold, unblinking lens of an alien intellect. The Borg's legacy is not a fleet in ruins, but a haunting question now buried in the secret archives of the Inquisition and the Mechanicus. Is the Imperium's eternal struggle a noble fight for survival? Or is it the thrashing of a diseased, irrational beast, as the Borg assessed? The universe of the 41st millennium endured. The Orcs got their ultimate fight. The Eldar preserved their fragile future. The Necrons contained a threat to reality's balance. And humanity survived, as it always does, through blood and faith. But something fundamental had shifted. The Borg, in their retreat, did not leave a scar, but a diagnosis. And in the dark, silent corners of the Imperium, where tech priests study salvaged Xenos code and Inquisitors ponder the nature of their enemy, that diagnosis is a poison that slowly, inexorably, spreads. The Borg sought to add the Imperium's distinctiveness to their own. Instead, they imposed their own distinctiveness upon it. The cold, terrifying knowledge that, in a universe of endless, glorious war, the most devastating weapon is not exterminatus, but the simple, logical conclusion that you are not worth conquering.